The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood quietly by the window of their private apartment. Her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, but she barely noticed its heat. The weight of the decision she and William had made pressed heavily on her heart. After months of careful consideration and countless sleepless nights, they had reached a conclusion that would change everything. William entered the room, his footsteps soft on the carpet. Even after all these years of marriage, Catherine could read his moods instantly. The tension in his shoulders, the way he ran his hand through his hair, the careful way he chose his words when something important was on his mind. Today was no different. He moved to stand beside her at the window, both of them looking out at the gardens where their children had played countless times. "The children are asking questions," Catherine said softly, not turning from the window. "Charlotte noticed that we've been having more quiet conversations lately. She's always been the most observant of the three." William nodded, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They deserve to know soon. But first we need to have that conversation with his father and grandmother's advisors. This isn't just about us anymore." The decision hadn't come suddenly. It had been building for months, perhaps even years. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, the weight of representing not just themselves but an entire institution had begun to take its toll. Catherine remembered the exact moment when she realized something had to change. It was during a charity event 3 months ago, when she caught sight of George in a photograph from school. He looked tired, older than his years, carrying a burden that no child should have to bear. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding?" Catherine asked, finally turning to look at her husband. "You promised that no matter what happened, we would always put our family first, that we would never let the crown come before our children's happiness." William's blue eyes met hers, and she saw the same determination that had first drawn her to him all those years ago at university. "I meant every word. I still do." They had spent weeks researching, quietly consulting with legal experts, reading about historical precedents. What they were considering wasn't unprecedented, but it was rare. Stepping back from their royal duties wasn't just a personal decision. It would send shockwaves through the monarchy, the media, and millions of people around the world who had followed their love story from the very beginning. Catherine walked to her desk and picked up a leather-bound journal she had been keeping for the past 6 months. Inside were her thoughts, her fears, her hopes for their future. She had written about the sleepless nights when paparazzi camped outside George's school, about the tears Charlotte had cried when she couldn't have a normal birthday party with her friends, about Louis asking why strangers always wanted to take his picture. "I've been thinking about your mother a lot lately," she said, settling into the comfortable armchair where she often read to the children. "About the letters she wrote, about how she wanted you and Harry to have as normal a childhood as possible. She would understand what we're doing." William's expression softened at the mention of Diana. "She always said that being royal was a privilege, but it shouldn't come at the cost of being human. She wanted us to experience real life, real relationships, real emotions." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They had met as ordinary students at St. Andrew's University, fallen in love without the weight of crowns and protocols. Their relationship had been built on shared laughter, late-night conversations about their dreams, and a mutual understanding of what they wanted from life. Somewhere along the way, those simple desires had become complicated by duty and expectation. Catherine opened her journal to a page she had written just the week before. "I wrote something down that I want to share with you. We have given the best years of our youth to this institution. We have carried out our duties with dedication and respect. But our children are only young once, and they deserve parents who are present, not just in body but in spirit." The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the garden below. George was teaching his younger siblings how to play cricket, his serious demeanor temporarily forgotten in the joy of the game. Louis was giggling as he missed the ball completely, while Charlotte was giving her brothers detailed instructions on proper batting technique. "They're so happy when it's just us," William observed, watching their children play. "No cameras, no protocols, no one telling them how to stand or what to say. That's the childhood I want to give them." Catherine closed the journal and looked at her husband with the same love and determination that had carried them through their courtship, their wedding, and the early years of their marriage. "Then we tell them tonight, together, and tomorrow, We begin the conversations that will change everything. William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers the way he had done thousands of times before. Are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back. The media will be relentless. There will be criticism, accusations that we're abandoning our duty. Our duty is to our children first, Catherine replied firmly. Everything else comes second. I would rather they remember us as parents who chose them over everything else, than as royals who put obligation before love. As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, William and Catherine made their final decision. They would step back from their royal duties not in anger or rebellion, but in love. Love for their children, love for each other, and love for the life they wanted to build together away from the constant glare of public scrutiny. The conversation with the children would be the first of many difficult discussions to come. But as they sat together in the quiet of their apartment, watching their children play in the garden below, they felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in years. They were choosing love over duty, family over obligation, and happiness over protocol. Tonight, their journey toward a different kind of life would begin. The children were gathered in the family sitting room after dinner, a cozy space filled with comfortable sofas, family photographs, and the warmth that only comes from a home truly lived in. George sat cross-legged on the carpet, building an elaborate structure with his blocks while Charlotte curled up beside her mother with a book. Louis, ever the energetic one, was attempting to teach the family dog a new trick with limited success. William and Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance. They had rehearsed this conversation in their minds countless times, but now that the moment had arrived, both parents felt the weight of what they were about to share. These three beautiful children, who had never known a life outside the royal bubble, were about to learn that everything was going to change. We'd like to talk to you all about something important, Catherine began, her voice gentle but serious enough to capture their attention. Louis abandoned his training session and climbed onto his father's lap, while George looked up from his blocks with curious eyes. Charlotte marked her place in her book and gave her parents her full attention. Are we in trouble? George asked, his young mind immediately jumping to the most obvious conclusion for a serious family meeting. William smiled and ruffled his eldest son's hair. No, nothing like that. In fact, this is about making some changes that we think will make our family even happier. Catherine had spent hours thinking about how to explain their decision in terms the children would understand. How do you tell a 10-year-old that his future as a potential king might look very different than everyone expected? How do you explain to an 8-year-old girl that the royal duties she had been slowly learning might not be her path after all? You know how sometimes we have to go to official events and there are lots of people and cameras, and you have to wear your best clothes and remember all the proper ways to behave? Catherine asked. All three children nodded. They had been part of enough royal events to understand exactly what their mother meant. The long car rides, the careful instructions from staff, the way they had to walk and smile and wave, even when they were tired or just wanted to play. Well, Daddy and I have been thinking that maybe our family would be happier if we didn't have to do quite so many of those events. William continued. What if instead we could spend more time together as a regular family? More time for school activities, for friends, for holidays where we don't have to worry about photographers following us? Charlotte, always the most perceptive, tilted her head thoughtfully. But aren't we supposed to do those things? Isn't it our job? Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at her daughter's question. Even at 8 years old, Charlotte understood the concept of duty and responsibility. It has been our job, sweetheart, and we've tried very hard to do it well. But sometimes, families need to make changes to be happier and healthier. Like when my friend Emma's family moved to a new house because their old one was too small, George asked, beginning to understand. Something like that, William agreed. Except instead of moving houses, we're thinking about changing the kind of work Mummy and I do. So we can spend more time being your parents and less time being in meetings and at official events. Louis, at 5 years old, was focused on the practical implications. Does this mean I don't have to wear my uncomfortable shoes anymore? The adults laughed and some of the tension in the room eased. Well, you might still have to wear nice shoes sometimes, Catherine said, pulling her youngest son into a hug. But probably not as often. What about Great-Granny? Charlotte asked, referring to the queen consort with the unconscious wisdom of a child who understood family dynamics. Will she be sad? William and Catherine had anticipated this question. The children adored their great-grandmother and grandfather, and the thought of disappointing them was genuinely concerning to their young minds. Great-granny and Granddad King Charles love us very much, William explained carefully. Just like we love you. Sometimes people who love each other don't always agree on everything, but that doesn't mean they stop loving each other. We'll talk to them and explain our feelings just like we're talking to you. George had been quietly processing everything, his serious nature evident in the way he considered each word. Will we still live here? He finally asked. For now, yes, Catherine answered. But eventually we might move somewhere quieter, somewhere we can have more privacy and you can have more normal experiences. Like riding bikes without someone following us with cameras? Charlotte asked hopefully. Exactly like that, William confirmed, and the smile on his daughter's face made every difficult conversation they would face in the coming weeks seem worthwhile. The family spent the next hour talking through the children's questions and concerns. They discussed what school might be like with less media attention, what it would mean for their friendships, and how their relationship with their extended family might change. Catherine was amazed by how adaptable the children were, how quickly they grasped the positive aspects of what their parents were proposing. There's something else we want you to understand, Catherine said as the conversation began to wind down. The reason we're making these changes isn't because we don't love our family or respect our heritage. It's because we love you three so much that we want to give you the best childhood possible. And because, William added, we believe that being good people is more important than having important titles. As they tucked the children into bed that night, each parent spent extra time with each child, answering additional questions and providing reassurance. George wanted to know if he would still learn about history and leadership, something that had always fascinated him. Charlotte was concerned about her favorite charities and whether she could still help children who needed support. Louis simply wanted to make sure the family dog could come with them wherever they went. Later, as William and Catherine sat together in their bedroom, they reflected on how well the conversation had gone. The children's questions had been thoughtful, and their concerns genuine, but there had been no tears, no anger, no accusations of having their futures stolen from them. They're remarkable, Catherine said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. They understood everything we were trying to tell them. They're wise beyond their years, William agreed. But they shouldn't have to be. That's exactly why we're doing this. Outside their window, London continued its bustling evening rhythm, unaware that inside Kensington Palace, a royal family had just taken the first concrete step toward redefining what their lives would look like. The conversation with the children had been the easy part. Tomorrow would bring meetings with palace officials, difficult conversations with family members, and the beginning of a process that would ultimately change the course of British royal history. But tonight, as they listened to the peaceful sounds of their children sleeping down the hall, William and Catherine felt confident that they had made the right choice. Their children's understanding and acceptance had given them the strength they would need for the challenges ahead. The morning after their conversation with the children, William woke before dawn with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Today marked the beginning of what would undoubtedly be the most challenging series of conversations of his life. He had requested a private meeting with his father, King Charles, and his stepmother, Queen Camilla, scheduled for 10 o'clock at Clarence House. Catherine found him in the kitchen, already dressed in a dark suit, staring out at the garden while his coffee grew cold. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself when he was preparing for battle, because that's what this felt like to him. Not a fight with his family, but a fight for his family. You don't have to do this alone, she reminded him, straightening his tie with the gentle touch that had always calmed him. We're partners in this, remember? I know, he said, covering her hand with his. But this first conversation needs to be just me and him, father to father. He needs to understand that this isn't some reckless decision made in anger or frustration. The drive to Clarence House seemed both endless and far too short. William had spent the journey rehearsing his words, thinking about everything he wanted to convey to his father. This wasn't about rejecting the monarchy or abandoning his heritage. This was about choosing a different path, one that honored his mother's memory and protected his children's futures. King Charles was waiting in his study, surrounded by the papers and red boxes that seemed to follow him everywhere. At 75, he carried the weight of the crown with dignity, but William could see the weariness in his father's eyes. the constant pressure that came with the role he had waited decades to fulfill. "William," Charles said, rising from his desk with a slight smile, "you sounded quite serious on the telephone yesterday. I hope everything is well with Catherine and the children." "Everyone is healthy, thank you," William replied, accepting his father's gesture to sit in one of the comfortable leather chairs by the fireplace. "But we do need to talk about something important, something that affects all of us." Charles settled into his own chair, his expression becoming more attentive. "I'm listening." William took a deep breath and began with the words he had practiced. "Catherine and I have made a decision about our future role in the royal family. We want to step back from our official duties and focus on raising our children with more privacy and normalcy." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Charles's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, concern, and finally a kind of resigned understanding. "I see," Charles said finally. "And you've thought this through completely? You understand what you're proposing?" "We've thought of little else for months," William replied honestly. "This isn't a decision we've made lightly. We've consulted legal experts. We've researched historical precedents, and most importantly, we've considered what's best for George, Charlotte, and Louis." Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture William remembered from childhood. "Your mother used to stand exactly like that when she was thinking through difficult problems," Charles said quietly. The mention of Diana created a moment of shared understanding between father and son. Both men had loved her. Both had been shaped by her presence and her absence. Both understood her desire to give her children as normal a life as possible. "She would support this decision," William said softly. "She always said that being royal should never come at the cost of being human." Charles turned back to face his son, and William was surprised to see not anger or disappointment in his father's eyes, but something that looked almost like relief. "Do you know what keeps me awake at night?" Charles asked, settling back into his chair. "It's not the constitutional crises or the political pressures or even the media scrutiny. It's the knowledge that I've spent so many years preparing for this role that I sometimes forget what it means to simply be a grandfather." William felt something shift in the room, a lessening of the tension he had carried for weeks. "I see how George looks sometimes during official events," Charles continued. "The same way you looked when you were his age, dutiful, serious, carrying a weight that no child should have to bear. I told myself it was character building, that it was preparing you for your future responsibilities." "And it did," William said. "But it also cost us so much of our childhood. I don't want that for my children." Charles was quiet for a long moment, lost in thought. "There will be consequences," he said finally. "The media will be relentless. There will be criticism from traditionalists who believe you're abandoning your duty. The institution will need to adapt. And change is never easy for an organization that's survived for over 1,000 years." "I understand that," William replied. "But I also understand that the monarchy has always evolved to survive. Maybe this is just another evolution. And Catherine? She's fully committed to this path?" William's face softened when he spoke about his wife. "She's been the strongest advocate for this decision. She sees what the constant scrutiny is doing to the children, how it affects their ability to form normal friendships, to have genuine experiences. She wants them to know who they are as people before they have to decide who they want to be as public figures." Charles nodded slowly. "She's a remarkable woman. Your mother would have adored her." "They're very similar in many ways," William agreed. Both of them understood that love and family should come first always. The two men sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Charles spoke again. "What do you need from me?" The question surprised William. He had expected arguments, attempts to dissuade him, perhaps even anger. Instead, his father was asking how he could help. "Your understanding," William said simply. "Your blessing, if possible. And help in managing the transition, so that it doesn't damage the monarchy or cause unnecessary pain to the family." Charles stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. "We'll need to involve the palace communications team, obviously, and the constitutional experts. This will need to be handled very carefully to maintain public confidence in the institution. Are you saying you'll support our decision?" Charles looked up from the paper, and William saw his father's love and respect clearly in his eyes. "I'm saying that I trust your judgment. You and Catherine have proven yourselves to be thoughtful, dedicated parents and responsible members of this family. If you believe this is what's best for your children, then I will do everything in my power to make this transition as smooth as possible." William felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. The conversation he had dreaded most was turning into an unexpected moment of connection with his father. "There's one more thing," Charles added. "I want you to know that stepping back from official duties doesn't mean stepping away from family. You'll always be my son, and those 3 beautiful children will always be my beloved grandchildren." As William prepared to leave Clarence's house, he felt lighter than he had in months. The most difficult conversation was behind him, and he had his father's support. Now came the challenge of managing the practical details and preparing for the public announcement that would change everything. The palace conference room had never felt more intimidating. Catherine sat beside William at the long mahogany table, facing a dozen of the most senior advisors, communications experts, and constitutional lawyers in the royal household. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed harsh, illuminating the serious faces of people whose entire careers had been built around protecting and preserving the monarchy. Sir Edward Whitmore, the king's private secretary, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. His expression was carefully neutral, but Catherine could sense the underlying tension in the room. "Your Royal Highnesses, His Majesty has briefed us on your intentions. While we respect your decision, we must discuss the practical implications and potential consequences." Catherine felt William's hand briefly touch hers under the table, a small gesture of solidarity that gave her strength. They had anticipated this meeting would be difficult, but the reality of facing so many skeptical faces was more challenging than she had imagined. "We understand this is unprecedented in modern times," William began, his voice steady and confident. "But we believe it's the right decision for our family and ultimately, for the long-term health of the monarchy." Lady Margaret Thornton, the communications director, leaned forward with a stack of newspapers and printouts. "I'm afraid the media speculation has already begun. There are rumors circulating about your Royal Highnesses considering a reduced role. We're getting calls from journalists around the world." Catherine's stomach tightened. They had hoped to control the narrative, to announce their decision on their own terms. "What kind of speculation?" "Everything from marital problems to health issues to conflicts with His Majesty," Lady Thornton replied grimly. "The longer we wait to provide an official statement, the more wild the theories become." Sir Edward shuffled through his papers. "From a constitutional perspective, there are several precedents we can follow. The Duke of Windsor's abdication in 1936, obviously, though that was under very different circumstances. More recently, we have examples from other European monarchies where family members have stepped back to pursue private lives." "What would this mean practically?" asked James Morrison, the palace's legal advisor. "Would their Royal Highnesses retain their titles? Their place in the line of succession? Their security arrangements?" The questions came rapid fire, each one highlighting another layer of complexity they hadn't fully considered. Catherine found herself thinking of the children, probably in their lessons at this very moment, unaware that their futures were being discussed and dissected by a room full of adults. "We want to retain as much normalcy as possible for our children," Catherine said, speaking up for the first time. "They didn't choose this life, and they deserve the chance to discover who they want to be, without the weight of constant public scrutiny." "With respect, Your Royal Highness," said Dr. Patricia Wells, the constitutional expert, "they were born into this life. Prince George is third in line to the throne. That cannot be changed simply because you prefer a different path for him." William's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "We're not asking to change the line of succession. We're asking for the space to raise our children so they can make informed decisions about their own futures when they're adults." "And what about your charitable work?" asked Sarah Coleman, the director of royal patronages. "You're personally involved with over 40 organizations. The Prince of Wales's Trust, the mental health initiatives, the early childhood development programs. These cause tremendous good in the world." Catherine had anticipated this question and had spent weeks thinking about her response. "Our commitment to helping others doesn't end because we're stepping back from official duties. If anything, we hope to be more effective advocates when we're not constrained by protocol and traditional royal limitations." Lady Thornton was making notes furiously. "We'll need to craft a public statement that explains your reasoning, without undermining public confidence in the monarchy." This is a delicate balance. The public has watched your love story unfold, added Michael Richardson, the media relations specialist. From university sweethearts to the wedding of the century to devoted parents, many people see you as the modern face of the monarchy. They're invested in your success, which is exactly why they'll understand our decision, William replied. We've never hidden our devotion to our family. People will respect that we're putting our children's well-being first. Sir Edward looked uncomfortable. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Your Royal Highness. There are segments of the public and press who will view this as abandonment of duty. Questions will be raised about the cost of your security, your housing, your staff salaries. Taxpayers may feel that you're choosing the benefits of royal life without the responsibilities. Catherine felt a flash of anger at the implication that they were somehow trying to have their cake and eat it too. We've given 12 years of our lives to royal duty. We've carried out thousands of engagements, supported hundreds of charities, and represented this country with dignity around the world. This isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about choosing where our primary responsibility lies. Your children, said Dr. Wells quietly, and Catherine nodded. Our children, William confirmed. And before anyone suggests we're being selfish, let me remind you that my mother died because of the relentless media attention that comes with royal life. I will not allow my children to grow up in that same dangerous environment. The mention of Diana brought a sobering silence to the room. Everyone present understood the weight of that tragedy and its lasting impact on William and Harry. What timeline are you considering? Sir Edward asked finally. We'd like to make the announcement within the next 2 weeks, Catherine replied, before the children's school term ends. We want them to have the summer to adjust to the idea before facing questions from classmates and teachers. Lady Thornton was already planning. We'll need to coordinate with Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Downing Street. The Prime Minister's office will want to be briefed. And we should consider the impact on the Commonwealth realms where you serve as representatives. What about public engagements already scheduled? Asked Sarah Coleman. You have commitments through the end of the year. We'll honor our existing commitments, William said. We're not disappearing overnight. This will be a gradual transition that allows for proper handover of our patronages and responsibilities. Dr. Wells cleared her throat. There's one more issue we need to discuss. Where will you live? Kensington Palace is a working royal residence. If you're no longer working royal, Catherine and William exchanged a glance. They had discussed this privately but hadn't yet made any definitive decisions. We're exploring options, Catherine said carefully. We want to stay in the UK, but we need somewhere the children can have real privacy and security. The media will follow you wherever you go, Lady Thornton warned. Initially, the interest will be intense, but it will fade, William said with more confidence than he felt. When we're no longer part of the official royal story, when we're not attending state functions or making public statements, the interest will naturally decrease. Sir Edward looked around the table at his colleagues, then back at William and Catherine. Your Royal Highnesses, we serve at the pleasure of the Crown, and if this is your decision, then our job is to make it work as smoothly as possible. But I want you to understand that this path you're choosing is irreversible. Once you step back, it will be very difficult to step forward again. We understand, Catherine said quietly, and we're certain this is the right choice for our family. As the meeting concluded with assignments of tasks and timelines, Catherine felt both relief and apprehension. The wheels were now in motion for the most significant change in their lives since their wedding day. The official statement was scheduled to be released at precisely 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Catherine stood in their private apartment, watching the children play in the garden one last time as the family they had been for the past 12 years. In less than an hour, everything would change. William was on the phone with the palace communications team, making final adjustments to the carefully crafted announcement that had gone through 17 drafts. Every word had been scrutinized, every phrase analyzed for potential misinterpretation. Catherine had read it so many times she could recite it from memory. Their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales, announced their intention to step back from their roles as senior working members of the royal family. This decision has been made after months of careful consideration and reflects their desire to provide their children with a more private upbringing while continuing to support His Majesty and the Commonwealth in a more limited capacity. The statement went on to outline their plans to maintain certain charitable commitments, their gratitude for the support they had received from the public, and their hope that people would respect their family's privacy during this transition. What it couldn't convey was the sleepless nights, the agonizing discussions, the fears and hopes that had led to this moment. Catherine's phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour with messages from friends who had heard rumors. Her sister Pippa had called 3 times, and her parents had driven up from Berkshire, wanting to offer their support in person. The children were blissfully unaware of the media storm that was about to break, though they knew something important was happening based on the unusual number of serious adult conversations taking place around them. "Mummy, why do you look worried?" Charlotte asked, appearing at Catherine's side with her characteristic directness. Catherine knelt down to her daughter's eye level, smoothing Charlotte's hair back from her face. "Remember our conversation about the changes our family is going to make? Well, today we're going to tell everyone else about our decision. Will people be angry with us?" Charlotte asked, her young face creased with concern. "Some people might not understand at first," Catherine replied honestly. "But the people who love us will support us, and that's what matters most." William finished his call and joined them, gathering Louis into his arms as the 5-year-old raced over. "How are my favorite people doing?" "Nervous," George admitted, looking older than his 10 years. "Will we see our friends again? From school and from our activities?" "Of course you will," William assured him. "In fact, you'll probably see them more often because we'll have more time for the things that are important to you." At exactly 2 o'clock, Catherine's phone rang. It was Lady Thornton calling to confirm that the statement had been released to the Press Association, and within minutes it would be on every major news website in the world. There was no going back now. "It's done," William said quietly, and Catherine felt a strange mixture of relief and terror wash over her. Within 10 minutes, both of their phones were ringing constantly. Text messages poured in from friends, colleagues, and family members. The children gathered around them, sensing the importance of the moment even if they didn't fully understand its magnitude. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, arrived with Catherine's father, Michael, shortly after 3 o'clock. Both looked worried but determined to support their daughter and son-in-law through whatever came next. "The media response has been mixed," Carol reported, having monitored the news coverage during their drive from Berkshire. "Some outlets are being supportive, calling it a brave decision that puts family first. Others are being more critical." "What are they saying?" Catherine asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Michael looked uncomfortable. "Some are questioning your commitment to duty. Others are speculating about the real reasons behind the decision. There are suggestions that there might be health issues or marital problems." William's jaw tightened with familiar frustration. "Exactly what we expected. They can't accept that we might simply want to prioritize our children's well-being." The evening news broadcasts were surreal to watch. The same anchors who had covered their wedding with such joy and enthusiasm were now analyzing their decision to step back, with royal experts offering opinions about what it meant for the future of the monarchy. Footage of their greatest moments played alongside speculation about their motivations. "Look," Charlotte said, pointing at the television where their wedding photos were being shown. "You both look so happy." "We were happy," Catherine said, pulling her daughter close. "And we still are. We're just choosing a different kind of happiness now." The children were fascinated by seeing themselves on television, though they didn't quite understand why their family's private decision had become such public news. George asked thoughtful questions about why people cared so much about what they did, while Louis was simply excited to see his own face on the screen. As the evening wore on, messages of support began arriving from unexpected sources. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Harry, who was calling from California. "Proud of you both for choosing love over duty. The kids will thank you one day." Several of their closest friends sent messages expressing their understanding and support. Some admitted they had seen the strain the royal life was putting on the family and weren't surprised by the decision. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source. The Queen Consort Camilla sent a handwritten note that arrived by royal messenger just before bedtime. "My dear Catherine and William," it read, "your father and I want you to know that we respect your decision and admire your courage. The love you have for your children shines through everything you do, and we believe that love will guide you well in this new chapter. You will always be family, and you will always be welcome. With all our love, Camilla." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes as she read the note aloud to William. The support from Charles and Camilla meant more than either of them had expected. As they tucked the children into bed that night, each child had different concerns and questions. George wanted to know if they would still live in London and see their cousins regularly. Charlotte worried about her riding lessons and whether she could still participate in her favorite activities. Louis, with the resilience of a 5-year-old, was primarily concerned about whether they would still have movie nights and family game time. All the things that make us happy as a family will continue, Catherine promised each of them. In fact, we'll have more time for the things we love most. Later, as William and Catherine sat together in their bedroom, watching the late-night news coverage of their announcement, they reflected on the enormity of what they had set in motion. "Any regrets?" William asked softly. Catherine looked at him with the same love and determination that had carried them through their courtship, their wedding, and the challenging years of royal duty. "None, you?" "None," he confirmed. "I keep thinking about that quote from your wedding speech. Marriage is about supporting each other's dreams even when those dreams change." "Our dreams haven't changed," Catherine replied. "We still want to make a difference in the world. We still want to serve others and contribute to society. We're just going to do it as parents first and everything else second." Outside their window, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that inside Kensington Palace, a family was embarking on the most courageous journey of their lives. The announcement had been made, the wheels of change were in motion, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. 3 months after their announcement, the media storm had begun to settle into a more manageable rhythm. The initial frenzy of speculation and analysis had given way to a grudging acceptance that William and Catherine were serious about their decision and weren't going to be swayed by criticism or pressure to change their minds. Catherine stood in the kitchen of their new home, a beautiful but modest country house in Norfolk that offered the privacy and security their family needed. The morning sun streamed through windows that weren't bulletproof, overlooking a garden where the children could play without telephoto lenses, capturing their every move from distant trees. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been difficult goodbyes to staff members who had become like family, emotional final visits to charities that had been close to their hearts, and the challenging process of slowly withdrawing from the royal world that had defined their adult lives. But there had also been unexpected joys. George had started at a local school where he was simply George Cambridge rather than His Royal Highness Prince George. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, treated him exactly like every other student, expecting him to raise his hand to speak and clean up after himself during art projects. The normalcy was both jarring and wonderful. "Mummy, can James come over to play football this afternoon?" George asked, bounding into the kitchen with an energy Catherine hadn't seen in years. James was his new best friend, a boy who had no idea that George's great-grandfather was the King of England, and seemed to care only that George could score goals and shared his passion for wildlife documentaries. "Of course he can," Catherine replied, ruffling her son's hair. "But remember, you need to finish your homework first." It was such a beautifully ordinary conversation. No private secretaries to consult, no security protocols to arrange, no consideration of how a 10-year-old's playdate might affect the dignity of the crown. Just a mother and son making simple plans for an afternoon. William emerged from his study, where he had been working on his new role as a conservation consultant for several wildlife organizations. Without the constraints of royal protocol, he was able to take more direct action, make stronger statements about environmental protection, and work with organizations that might have been considered too political for a working royal. "The Henderson Foundation wants me to join their expedition to Kenya next month," he said, unable to hide his excitement. 3 weeks of hands-on conservation work with local communities. "That's wonderful," Catherine said, though she noticed Charlotte looking up from her cereal with interest. "Can we come too?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "I've been reading about Kenya in my geography lessons." William and Catherine exchanged a glance. The old royal protocols would have made such a family trip impossible. Too much security, too much media attention, too many diplomatic considerations. But now, as private citizens, they could make decisions based purely on what would be best for their family. "Let me look into it," William said. "It might be a great educational opportunity for all of you." Louis, now 6 years old and attending the local village school, was thriving in ways that constantly amazed his parents. His teacher had commented that he was one of the most naturally social children she had ever taught, making friends easily and showing remarkable empathy for classmates who were struggling. Louis asked if he could bring his lunch to eat with the new boy in his class, Catherine reported. Apparently the child has been sitting alone and Louis wants to make sure he feels welcome. That's our boy, William said proudly. He's always had the biggest heart. The conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone ringing. It was Pippa, calling with an update on the latest media coverage of their transition. There's a lovely piece in the Times today, Pippa reported, an editorial about how your decision has started important conversations about work life, balance, and the pressure we put on children to live up to family expectations. Catherine felt a warm sense of satisfaction. One of their hopes had been that their decision might encourage other families to prioritize their children's well-being over societal expectations, even when that meant making difficult choices. There's also increasing support from younger people, Pippa continued. Social media polls are showing that most people under 30 completely understand why you made this choice. The generational divide in public opinion had been one of the most interesting aspects of the public response to their decision. Older traditionalists tended to view their choice as abandoning duty, while younger people saw it as a courageous prioritization of family values over institutional expectations. The children's school has been wonderful about maintaining their privacy, Catherine shared. The other parents have been respectful, and the teachers treat them exactly like every other student. It had been one of her biggest fears, that the children would be treated differently, either with excessive deference or with resentment from families who felt intimidated by their background. Instead, the village community had embraced them as neighbors and fellow parents, judging them by their contributions to school, events, and their children's behavior rather than their former royal status. Charlotte had joined the school's environmental club and was passionate about a project to create a butterfly garden on the school grounds. George had made the football team and was learning to play the violin. Louis was taking swimming lessons at the local pool and had declared his intention to become a marine biologist. It's remarkable how quickly children adapt, William observed, watching through the window as Louis attempted to teach the family dog a new trick. They're becoming who they're meant to be rather than who they thought they were supposed to be. Catherine nodded, thinking about how different her children seemed now compared to just 6 months ago. The careful formality that had been trained into them from birth was gradually being replaced by natural spontaneity and genuine self-expression. I had coffee with Sarah Mitchell yesterday, Catherine said, referring to one of the other mothers from Charlotte's class. She asked if I missed the royal life, the glamour and attention. What did you tell her? That I sometimes missed the platform we had to highlight important causes, but I never missed the feeling that we were living our lives for other people's expectations rather than our own values. William reached across the kitchen island to take her hand. Any regrets about giving up the tiaras and state dinners? Catherine laughed, the same bright laugh that had captured his heart all those years ago at university. I've discovered that I much prefer muddy Wellington boots and school sports days to formal gowns and protocol meetings. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the children racing in from the garden, their cheeks flushed from the cold autumn air and their clothes properly dirty from an afternoon of outdoor play. We're building a fort, Charlotte announced breathlessly, and we're going to camp in it tonight if it doesn't rain. Can we have hot chocolate while we plan the camping trip? George added, already pulling mugs from the cupboard with the casual assumption that his request would be granted as Catherine began heating milk for hot chocolate. And William helped the children plan their camping adventure. She felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was the life they had chosen, messy, unpredictable, wonderfully ordinary, and completely their own. You know what the best part is? William said quietly, watching their children animatedly discuss their fort-building project. What? When they tell stories about their childhood someday, they'll remember camping in the garden and scoring goals at school and butterfly gardens, not state dinners and official photographs, Catherine smiled, knowing that they had given their children the greatest gift possible, the chance to simply be children. 2 years had passed since William and Catherine made their quiet departure from royal life, and the transformation in their family was remarkable. Catherine sat in the comfortable living room of their Norfolk home, watching the evening news with a sense of peaceful detachment. The reporter was covering the latest royal engagement, and she felt no twinge of regret or longing for the life they had left behind. The doorbell rang, and she opened it to find their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, holding a covered dish and wearing her characteristic warm smile. "I made too much shepherd's pie again," Mrs. Henderson said, though they both knew she had made it specifically for Catherine's family. "Would you like some for dinner tonight?" "That's incredibly kind of you," Catherine replied, accepting the dish gratefully. "The children will be thrilled. They still talk about your shepherd's pie from last month." Mrs. Henderson beamed with pride. "How are they settling into the new school year?" "Wonderfully," Catherine said, and she meant it completely. "George has been selected for the county youth cricket team. Charlotte's won a science fair prize for her project on renewable energy. And Louis has discovered a passion for drama. He's playing a tree in the autumn play." "A tree," Mrs. Henderson laughed. "How perfectly delightful. And how are you and William?" "We're happy," Catherine said simply. And the truth of that statement still sometimes surprised her with its simplicity and completeness. After Mrs. Henderson left, Catherine reflected on how much their definition of happiness had changed. 2 years ago, happiness had been measured in successful public engagements, positive media coverage, and the approval of palace officials. Now it was measured in muddy shoes by the back door, children's laughter echoing through the house, and the luxury of making decisions based purely on what felt right for their family. William arrived home just as the children were finishing their homework at the kitchen table. His work with several conservation organizations had taken him to Scotland for 3 days, and the children rushed to greet him with the enthusiasm they had always shown but which now felt more relaxed, less formal. "Did you see any puffins?" Louis asked immediately, climbing onto his father's lap. "Actually, I did," William replied, pulling out his phone to show pictures from his trip. "And I learned some fascinating things about how they're adapting to climate change." George looked up from his mathematics homework with interest. "Could we visit the puffin colony someday? For our family summer holiday?" "I don't see why not," William said, ruffling his eldest son's hair. "We could combine it with visiting your cousin Harry and Meghan in the United States. They've been asking when we're coming to see them." The casual way they could now make holiday plans never stopped amazing Catherine. No security arrangements to coordinate with multiple countries. No diplomatic protocols to consider. No media coverage to manage. They could simply decide to visit family or explore new places based on their children's interests and their own desires. Charlotte looked up from her art project with paint-stained fingers. "Sarah's family is going to Italy for half-term. She says Rome has the most amazing history. Could we maybe consider something like that?" "I think that sounds wonderful," Catherine replied. "We could explore all those ancient sites you've been studying in history class." The conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone buzzing with a text message. It was from a number she didn't immediately recognize, but when she opened it, she saw it was from a journalist who had somehow obtained her personal contact information. "Mrs. Cambridge, I'm writing a feature about families who have chosen alternative lifestyles. Would you be willing to comment on how your children have adjusted to life outside the royal family?" William noticed her expression change as she read the message. Media inquiry? Someone wanting a comment about how the children are adjusting to life outside the royal family, Catherine said, showing him the message. William's jaw tightened slightly with familiar frustration, but his response was calmer than it would have been 2 years earlier. "Block the number. And remind me to have another conversation with the children about not sharing personal information with anyone they don't know well." It was a reminder that complete privacy was still an ongoing challenge, but the intrusions were now rare rather than constant. Most importantly, the children were old enough to understand the need for some caution without living in fear or feeling that they couldn't have normal friendships and activities. "Actually," Catherine said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about something. What if we did agree to one interview, not about our personal lives or the children specifically, but about the broader issue of families choosing different paths?" William looked surprised. "You want to talk to the media?" "I want to talk about the importance of putting children first," Catherine clarified. "Not as former royals, but as parents who made a difficult choice and want other families to know that it's okay to prioritize your children's well-being over societal expectations." They had received hundreds of letters over the past 2 years from families around the world who had been inspired by their decision to make their own difficult choices. Parents who had left high-pressure careers to spend more time with their children, families who had moved away from demanding communities to find more balance, couples who had chosen different paths despite criticism from extended family. There's been such a positive response from people who feel they have permission to make similar choices in their own lives. Catherine continued, "Maybe we have a responsibility to speak about that." William considered this carefully. One interview focused on the broader message about family priorities, not on royal family drama or personal details. Exactly, Catherine agreed. Show people that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose love over expectation. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual chaos of bedtime routines, William and Catherine sat together on their back porch, watching the stars appear in the clear Norfolk sky. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of countryside evening, owls calling, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, the distant sound of their neighbor's dog barking. "Do you know what I realized today?" Catherine said softly. "What?" "It's been 3 weeks since anyone asked the children about their royal connections. 3 weeks since anyone treated them differently because of who their great-grandfather is." William smiled in the darkness. "They're just normal kids now." "They were always just normal kids," Catherine corrected gently. "Now they get to act like it." The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation, and Louis appeared in the doorway wearing his pajamas and carrying his favorite stuffed elephant. "I had a bad dream," he said quietly, and without hesitation, both parents made room for him between them on the outdoor sofa. "What was your dream about?" Catherine asked, pulling a blanket around all three of them. "I dreamed that we had to move back to the palace and I couldn't play with my friends anymore," Louis confessed. William and Catherine exchanged a glance over their son's head, both of them feeling a mixture of sadness that he still occasionally worried about this and gratitude that they had made the choice they did. "That's not going to happen," William said firmly. "We chose this life because we wanted you and George and Charlotte to grow up surrounded by friends and adventure, and all the things that make childhood special. Promise?" Louis asked, leaning against his mother's shoulder. "Promise," Catherine replied, kissing the top of his head. "This is our home now, and you are exactly where you belong." As they sat together under the stars, the three of them wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their chosen life, Catherine felt a deep sense of completeness. They had given up titles and palaces and public adoration, but they had gained something infinitely more valuable: the freedom to love their children without reservation, to make decisions based on their family's needs rather than institutional expectations, and to watch their children discover who they truly were meant to be. The quiet departure that had moved millions of people around the world had led them exactly where they belonged: home.